specific powers the president has to stop the other branches. And that's really, really important. What would be number 5 then? We never wrote down number 5. All right, logically speaking, I said logically speaking, which one would be the strongest and which one would be the weakest leader? I mean, which one would be 5 and then which one would ultimately...
The French would be 5, wouldn't it? And then without their majority, and then the English...
Okay, why would French be 5?
Without their majority?
Yeah.
Because the power would then be split between the president and the prime minister.
So in France, basically, why do they call it a hybrid system? What do you have 2 of?
2 executives.
You have 2 executives. Okay, so does that make the French president that much stronger?
Yeah, no, okay, so it's going to be the British.
See, the French president, when you think about it, if you've got 2 executives, that basically means that you've got one over here that's got control of, you know, the head of the executive, the actual president, the head of government, state, if you will. And then you've got this prime minister that's basically overseeing the parliament where the majority party or the majority parties are ruling. So when you think about it, this is the only one that's got a second executive that could be completely opposite of you because of cohabitation. So the French are actually going to fall as 6 in this because you could conceivably have a second executive that's from the other party. So yeah, you still have powers over here, but the other party is going to be able to subtract some from that second executive. Britain...
So the French are going to be either 1 or 6.
That's right. They're going to be extreme. They're either going to be 1 or they're going to be 6. The British system or a parliamentary system like Britain will either be 2 or 5. Because when you think about it, even though the prime minister is, you know, not necessarily in its strongest position, that prime minister, it's not like the monarch is going to be running around doing things in a typical system to contradict the prime minister. It can happen, but not typically. It doesn't happen in England, say, for example. So when you think about this, the U.S. is going to be pretty strong, and even when it's weak, it's going to be pretty strong. The French system is either going to be really strong as a president or really, really weak as a president. And then the British system is going to be 2, bless you. But it could also be number 5 in this, again, when you think about it, because prime ministers can be handcuffed by not having that majority. And that, or if you will, they have the hung parliament, where there is not one majority party. And the British are actually a little bit nervous about this right now, this idea of a hung parliament. No, I don't want to get into this because then I have to test you on it. What other questions have y'all got, I guess? Do you remember the German parliament, by the way, too? What was different about the German parliament? And we did speak about this briefly.
They have the chancellor that before Hitler they didn't have it, but after they instituted the constructive no confidence.
That's true, but it's separate from no. Go ahead, Andrew.
Wasn't something like half was proportional and half was from a direct election?
Yeah.
Germany actually had an interesting system in the sense of their elections, where half of it was basically Americanized, so that they're voting for the individual, and half of it was proportional, so that you're voting for the party. And the sense was that you could get the best people in there that you wanted people in, but the compromise would be is that you could also get in a proportional group of other parties that maybe would never be able to elect their own individual, but if they got 5% of the vote, they'd still get 5% of that half of the legislature seats. And Germany, if you remember, I believe has over 1,000 members. So they've got a huge legislature, even though their country is much, much smaller. And you remember Sabato wanted to have 1,000 in the United States Congress. And nobody here really liked that, but it's actually commonplace in Germany.
The 2 rounds thing, what was that about? I forget exactly how it worked, where they had, like, for the German chancellor, I believe it was, that he got elected, like, but then, like, if you had the 3 people elected, then they would take the bottom one and, you know, they'd have another thing for that.
Yeah, we did talk about that. I don't have a dry erase on me. But,
there's one right there.
But the gist of it was, and some of these other systems will do this, and they'll do a couple of things with this, actually. One would be is that maybe they'll just have 1 election. Others, they'll actually have 2. And say in round 1, if you've... Yeah, I don't really have one. If you've got A, B, and C, candidate A, candidate B, and candidate C, and if candidate A has got 40%, candidate B's got 35%, and then candidate C has got 25%, what they would do is X off candidate C, and then they would vote again. Wow, preparation. So if you got candidate A up here, candidate B up here, and candidate C. All right, what you would do effectively is candidate A would have 40, candidate B would have 35, candidate C would have 25. They would then go to the second round. And then in the second round, you would basically just be deciding between those 2, and eventually somebody is going to get that magic number. And this was, I believe, the French president that we were talking about this in reference to.
But this is done in Germany. This is German.
Did we say Germany?
I think so, but I'm not sure. That's what I'm asking.
1 second ago, but maybe maybe.
See, that's what I'm saying. I want to say that we discussed this with in reference to France.
Okay.
And yeah, it wasn't Germany. I
Okay,
believe
France?
it was the
Okay.
French president. And the idea is that the French president would always end up getting majority because you would progressively knock folks out, and then you'd have a second round. Other places would do something where they would go A, B, C, D, E, F, and basically you would select 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the idea is that your first choice, let's say that your first choice 7, 12, 31, 16, 14, and 20%. What they would do is you would actually go up there and you would vote 1, and this would be your first choice. Well, your first choice is clearly lost, so this would go away, and in the second round, you would then take your vote and it would go down here to this person. And progressively what they would do is they would continue to reshuffle your votes until you got somebody to have actually a majority. But in a lot of places they don't. This gets kind of complicated because you're voting 7 times at once. Go ahead, Andrew.
So they continue more than just a second round. It can go
That's right. They would continue going, and they would just keep knocking off candidates and knocking off candidates until somebody got a majority. So your first candidate lost. Okay, you take this away, and now it goes down to number 2. Well, this candidate lost, then you would take this up to number. Well, this candidate still lost, and then eventually you're going to be voting. Everybody's voting for all of the parties. It's just a question of what order. Go ahead.
It's kind of like a caucus in our system a little bit. They have different rounds in different states.
They do. Yeah, you
That's
could probably,
complicated.
but that's complicated. What other questions have y'all got? Anything from the articles, by the way? And there were really only 2 articles, I think, from this chapter.
15. Yeah.
I believe there were only 2, and the cash prize. We never really talked about the cash prize per se. Are y'all clear with what that was?
Not really.
Okay,
Are you
what was the
trying-
cash prize? It was dealing with Africa. I mentioned it in class. I believe I had given it to Ahmed. We didn't get to it one day. I mentioned it maybe for just about 5 minutes, not even at the beginning of the class. Go ahead, Kevin.
That's that email scam or something like that?
No, there was no email scam article. Not this one.
Okay.
This one was basically dealing Africa. Africa's concerned. When you think about Africa, they're not necessarily known for democracy. They're not necessarily known for fair and open political processes. They're not even necessarily known for leaders that follow the rules of constitutions or the ballots in elections as they come out. So Africa, there was a group that came out, and it was the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Came up with something, and they decided to give cash prizes. They decided to give cash prizes for the best African leaders every year. And the idea was that they were going to give $5 million. And the gist was that if you as a leader, go ahead. Well, this is specifically focused on Africa.
You know what I'm saying? Like you get like a $10 million prize, which are prize.
But see, Nobel Peace Prize isn't necessarily for a leader.
Yes, peace. I'm just saying.
That may have been, I don't know this for certain, but that may have been one of the models that they used.
Yeah.
The idea is, and remember that the stats on this, or the idea is that you had to have a transparent administration. You had to follow the rules of law. You had to eliminate or minimize corruption and political prisoners and things like this. You had to follow the edicts of the legislature and the court. Basically, you had to be